What I want to talk about today is called trading on the correct side of the market force. Now, with Boomerang, as you know, I've created some very special indicators. I have looked through for the last 25 years. I've seen so many types of indicators, and I'm fascinated by indicators. To be honest with you, if you go over here and you look at the library. Hold on a quick second while this loads. I want you to see this. If you look at the library, for example, of NinjaTrader indicators, it's just very extensive, and I've added some extra ones in there that you can get from various places. And you can see them all here. Here's the library of Ninja indicators here. Look at that. And it's pretty astounding, but I want to tell you this. I am familiar, very familiar in most cases, with probably about 90% of these. And I'm familiar with 95% of them. There may be a few that I'm not 100% really up on, but I would say about 90% of these I've gone over all of them. I'm very familiar with them. Under the U section, Ultra, is our Boomerang indicators, the UL bias accelerator, bias index 1, 2, the Ultra Boomerang support and resistance, the trade channels, trade signal line, and the trend bands. I'm going to go over those with you today. Not all of them, but the very specific ones that we send you that I think are key for trading with Boomerang. But again, I'm very familiar with almost all these indicators, so when I show you what I've built, you've got to understand I know about these other indicators. I know what they do. I'm very familiar with them. In the Boomerang indicators for day traders action system that we built here, it's pretty wonderful because it consists of, this is called this thin line here. Don't mind my cursor, but I'll turn that off for now because we won't actually need that because I'm not going to be going over signals right away here. We'll just go to a regular pointer. You have this thin dash line here. This is the basis of Boomerang Day Trader on the chart patterns up here. And I'm not going to talk about the indicators right away. Get there in a minute. And this whole talk here about the indicators and the Boomerang is just going to be about 15-20 minutes. First of all, you have this trade channels, which are the shaded areas here, and they're marked by this arrow. You have this thin dash line, which is called the trade signal line, and these yellow dots are sell signals on pullback to the signal line. Now, we always try to take the first one there as long as the configuration is correct for a Boomerang trade setup. The second part is this dotted thicker line here, which is called the Cobra. This tends to front run the movement of the markets ahead of what are called the dynamic trend bands. And the dynamic trend bands are these blue. This is the blue here and the magenta. These are the dashed dotted line here. The thinner one is the dynamic trend band number 1, and number 2 is this thicker magenta colored one here. Now, when we set up a Boomerang trade, we're looking at the opening of a new sell channel, for example, and we've got everything coded so that when the candles become bearish, they turn red for bearish color and blue or green for the bullish color. Now, what's exciting is that on top of this configuration, I put a Bollinger Band 14 period, 2 period standard deviation. I really like to see that around the trade channel. I don't know, it makes me feel comfortable, I think, too, because we certainly know where the limits of where that market should hold. But we have a much tighter stop than this. I'm just saying I like seeing that surrounding it, because the one thing about the Bollinger Band that's exciting is that when you get a move that taps the Bollinger Band, in the case of our sell channel here, you can see that once it taps that Bollinger Band, it tends to light up the downside movement of the market until you see it start to flatten out and the prices spread away from the Bollinger Band, and that's when you get a reversal. Doesn't mean necessarily you're going to get a complete reversal. Here's another example here where the prices come up and tap the Bollinger Band, and notice how even though it's a choppy upside pattern, they tend to walk their way up after tapping the Bollinger Band. Same thing here, tapping the Bollinger Band and kind of walking their way down. So that's another indicator we use on Boomerang. Over here, you have a support and resistance line that's constantly changing with the movement of the market. But again, back to these dynamic trend bands, which are actually the basis for our trade setups in Boomerang Day Trader, and the dynamic trend bands are incredible. It took me a long time to really develop these and get them just right, but they are highly configured to give us very accurate bias readings. When the dynamic trend bands cross over, like they are right here, you can usually watch for a directional move in that way, as you see here. When they cross to the downside, even though minor, you can see the crossover here. And sometimes they just go flat and they don't go either way, and they'll cross over again, or they'll, like you can see, they're just running flat here, flat, but then when they finally cross over officially, you get that downside movement. Sometimes you have periods where they don't necessarily produce a larger scale move, but once they cross here, see the crossover on the upside here? Here's where you get a larger scale move towards the upside. Now what's important is that's just one way to read the bias of the market using our indicators, the dynamic trend bands. And again, these are the best in the industry as far as I've seen. I configure these because of being familiar with all these other indicators. I know what works best. One of the features that we have is that they color change when the bias changes, and we use that to signify when to take a trade on the pullback to the signal line. As you can see right here, as they're matching color, we can trade the market lower. When they're matching color here, well, this is different situation because this is a 4 spike candles the upside. It created a fat channel, so there's no trade here. But that's a different issue. I'm not going to talk about that right now, but I want to show you how when the dynamic trend bands match color like they are here, pull back the signal line, gives us a sell signal. Now, in talking about these, I just wanted to show you these indicators and how they're used. But what I mainly want to talk about right now is the configuration, which I don't often talk about these because the dynamic trend bands will do all our work in setting up the Boomerang trades, and that's where the cash is. But a lot of you have asked me to talk a little bit more about the indicators that we use. This is bias index or bias indicator number 1, bias indicator number 2, and this is called the Hyperscalp, which is originally was a very popular add-on. It's still available individually, but it's you know, I will often include that in the Boomerang package after talking to the customer and seeing what their needs are. Hyperscalp is very amazing, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but for right now, let me explain to you what this is. Bias index number 1 gives bias readings when we get a crossover under this zero line, whether yellow histograms or full-on red histograms. And on the upper side, same thing, yellow on the crossover and green if it gets bullish. And we have these wicks that are inside of the candles that start to come sprouting out like a little plant when the bias extends to the downside or upside. You can see the wicks inside of the green candles here. They're just peeking out now, and then they turn down. So this indicator is very valuable in many different ways, just for giving an overall view of the market. Now, one way is that if the prices are holding under this 2.5 period line here, you got a flat market and it's probably not going to go anywhere. Another indicator within this is that when they go from a solid color like here immediately to a red color, that's a very strong sell signal in most cases, and you can see the market came right down. But again, look how the wicks after crossing over the zero line are only extending to this 2.5 period line here. Tells you that the market isn't gathering much strength, and to be a little bit careful as far as where to go. This is a very choppy short-term drop in the markets. Let me find a more extended move that I can show you more. Oh, here's a good one here. Now this was a perfect Boomerang setup. You had a sell signal, you had the matching dynamic trend bands, which one of our rules is if the dynamic trend bands match color, just go ahead and take a trade on the pullback the signal line as soon as they're matching color, which was right here, and you can see we had a nice move to the downside. So what the first thing you notice is, notice how the histogram up here went from yellow immediately to red. Well, that's a sell signal there. That's telling you watch for sell bias. So as the market starts chopping around a little and working its way lower, notice here that the bias index number 2, otherwise known as the market force indicator, turned red right here as the prices started rolling back, and all of a sudden There goes the market starting to roll to the downside. You see that? Now, as it's thrusting lower, we're getting dips down on the market force indicator to this green line level, which is not an exhaustion level, but it's a tendency of the market to thrust to that level and kind of back off a little. So it's sort of a forced level that we watch for divergence and other things. So notice that was the first force down here, and the market thrust here, pushed a little lower as the market collapsed more, and then as prices came down even more here, you could see the force starting to back off a little bit. And that's telling you that it's probably close to the end of the move. Did you see that? Now, an additional tool is right here, which is my precision hyperscalp indicator. And this reads deeper into the price. You can see it's front running. Time to go to a cursor here. You can see that it's front running the movement of the market right in line with this first dip on the bearish side up here. And as it starts moving once again under this 2-point level here, this white line, Hyperscalp is starting to thrust lower. But here's what's really unique, is as it runs down and hits this 5-point exhaustion level line and moving slightly below it towards 7, right as the prices back off a little, and you can see it in the market force here backing off, there's a color change to an off red color in the candle here. You see that? And that's telling you that maybe the market's just going to rest a little bit here, or it may indeed reverse. And in this case, the market reversed to the upside as the histograms on Hyperscalp turned green and the prices thrust higher. Well, you can see also that once again it ran up to the 5-period line, thrust up higher, changed color right here, and that was exactly right at the peak of this move as they dropped back lower. And another identifying tool was that you never saw the wicks or the histograms on bias index number 1 take off much above this 2.5-period line. And look how weak the market force is. Even though the market thrust its way up here, it was a weak move because you never got that full-on thrust in the market force indicator. That also tells me why we wouldn't have gone long up here, because this is a fat channel. This is one of our rules for Boomerang. You don't trade against a fat channel here. So that's pretty important. You can see on a steady basis, if I just put you over here and crunch this chart up a little bit here, I'm going to show you something more. We're talking about Hyperscalp right now. See how the market runs look what happens every time it gets to this green line, or green or red in the case of upside exhaustion. You see that? Flows to the downside here, literally caught the bottom here, ran up, pushed a little higher, pushed a little higher, and then started to fade out as they came into the close. Now this is coming into the close, but I wanted to show you one thing you can do when you're tracking the market. If you're trying to go for a runner on Boomerang, this is another thing you can do. I've got this white it's called white smoke colored line here, and the first thing you notice when they run up and tap the red line up here, we mark that level here with the white line. We've got a brand new crossover of the dynamic trend bands, and all the trend bands are matching. So you would have bought this pullback signal line at 86.5, and they ran up to 91.25. So you would have had your first 3-point move right here. We just scalped for 3 points on Boomerang. If you decided to hold for a runner, because when the line got up here, you saw the market force was starting to build a little bit, just ever so mildly, and then thrusting above this 10-point line here. Now the histograms are once again thrusting up again. So you've got higher prices and a higher thrust. See, it's about equal to this thrust here, but it's slightly higher. Well, now prices dip back a little bit here on the two off color candles, and they make a third thrust with clearly a stronger, and this is kind of typical for the closing period. I'm showing you this because I'm going to show you comparison in a second. A stronger thrust and higher prices taking them up to the top here. So that was a third level move. You can see it here. 1, 2, 3. So it's actually measuring the internal Elliott wave force of this entire move. Wave 1, 2, 3, 4, and the fifth wave taking it all the way to the top. Do you see that? I don't know if you're super familiar with Elliott wave, which is one of the methods for chart tracking on the charts, but my Hyperscalp will actually measure the Elliott wave for you if you know how to read it, and you'll learn how to watch it by watching this video. Now let me move forward and find, this is all Globex here, let me find another area where you get a similar move intraday, not into the close, and I can show you that this one was a very powerful thrust higher. Let me find one that's sort of a mixed thrust movement. This will help us a lot here. Let's see what we've got. Well, this one's good, but I want to show you, you can see here level 1 push, 2, and then it only hit a third wave lower move before they started to reverse. And the dynamic trend bands got spread out a little wide, and that showed you where the market was ready to turn around. Let me see if this one is a very extended move. This is good here. So here's an extended move here. You notice first of all the dynamic trend bands cross over right here, which is your first sign of very high odds of a powerful move in that direction, at least at some level. It actually started lower down here with our first thrust up to the Hyperscalp here. So we mark that with the white line, and now you're watching to see what happens. Now notice here as the second thrust comes up, it's very powerful, and it shoots way above the 5-period line all the way up just under the 10-period line, which you could actually put another line in here up at the 10-period. And I have instructions on the resource center of my blog on how to put in constant lines on these indicators if you want. But let's mark this one up here, peak of the indicator, peak of the chart. Now this is where it gets interesting because I want you to see this. Here's one of the most valuable ways of using my Hyperscalp. So now notice here, the market makes another thrust, it comes down, makes one little thrust, but then it starts having these off-color green candles. So it's still climbing, but it's doing it with sort of a off-color move. It's just sort of the strength of is moving it by itself. You get another level move here, a third level move, and then here's what's really significant. As they thrust higher, you get another move up to the top here, which creates a new high, and a third level move up here. And if you're watching for a reversal, they're pushing higher right here, actually exceeding this white line. Let me open this up a little bit here. And getting another green histogram here with a higher price, but notice that the histogram is substantially lower than these up here. That's your reversal spot right there, or very close to it. So on that next move up, and then the candle, the histogram turned the off green color, that's the peak in the market right there, and they backed off. Now it wasn't a very substantial move, 22 quarter. I'm using the mini NAS, by the way, for all this, one of my favorite trading instruments. And the market, because it was in an upside trend with a very steep dynamic trend band, they only backed off a little bit, but notice how the Hyperscalp came just right down to the green line exhaustion, hovered around here, and started to work its way back up. See that? So divergence is one of the key ways to use Hyperscalp. Now I'm going to find another divergence move for you. You can see, by the way, I don't know if you'd noticed, but going through all these charts, you can see all the boomerang trades here. When there's a crossover or matching colored dynamic trend bands, you can see the sell here, another sell here, no sell here because you already had an extended move. You're going to just want to wait for the next move. But look at Hyperscalp. Here's a classic divergence kind of move here. You're watching for a crossover or match to the dynamic trend bands. And one of our rules is if you don't get the right setup on the dynamic trend bands before there's a crossover or matching colors, which is not the case here. You see that all the dots were used up in the signal line before. There's 6 dots, up to 6 candles will print after the first candle opens up in the buy channel in this case. But if you get a crossover and they're all used up, you can trade a pullback to the Cobra, which just about occurred right here, just as an example. But mainly what I wanted to show you is look at how Hyperscalp made a thrust up here to this high. And now notice when the price is thrust up higher again, here's the next high on Hyperscalp down here, substantially lower from this one. The price is higher, Hyperscalp lower. That's a reversal sign coming in. Now whether you trade that or not depends on if you want to go ahead and take the risk of taking that short up there or just waiting for the next Boomerang trade setup, which are 90% accurate. Anyway, you can see the market clearly reversed up there and down they came. See how that works? Let's find one more example here and correlate all 3 of the indicators once again. Well, this is a rather classic one here too. Market's opening here. You're not going to do this with the market, in pre-market necessarily. So your first thrust is coming in here, just right at the opening. Your second thrust is coming in up right here. They got to come up here and hit the 5-period line. And there's the market moving to this level there. Now the market kind of flounders around a little bit. It starts edging higher here. And notice how all of these are staying green here. The wicks pushing over the 250 level on bias index number 1, and it's trying to stretch up to the magenta line here to get up into the exhaustion area. You can see the force is strong. It's hovering around this 10-period line, but it's kind of backing off as they move higher. But look at Hyperscalp. You have substantially above this line, substantially higher prices, but much lower Hyperscalp histogram. Therefore, when the off color comes in right here on this candle, you can see that's like the peak of the move. So if you're holding long, that's where you'd want to get out to capture the whole move or anywhere up before then. But once you see the divergence kicking in, and then of course right after that they back off and fall back lower. So that's another example of how these indicators work. They're a combination of many different things over years of research with all the different types of ways to read the market force out there. And we invite you to take a look at Boomerang Day Trader as a tool to run your trading operations.